is president in January 2013 is going to face a very challenging global economic landscape. I think one thing that's important to remember is, for context, two pieces of context. One is it won't be as bad as 4 years ago. Barring something really bad happening over the next few months, one good thing is we're not going to be sitting at the top of a cliff, kind of looking down, wondering if there's a bottom. And so that's important. But the other thing with respect to what we've been through in the last 4 or 5 years is important, which is one of the things that we face as an economy is the question of how do we try to make sure the global economic crisis doesn't leave long-lasting scars, in a sense, and that the longer we sit with high unemployment, the more people leave the labor force, lose skills, things like that. The longer investment is low, we don't have as much R&D, firms don't build up capital, things like that. And so the key is, how do you navigate through where we've been and make sure we don't not only have lots of people unemployed, which is kind of, it's a personal tragedy for them, but also an economic one as well. So within that context, some of the kind of things they'll run up against in trying to get the economy back to a better level, one is definitely just the mess in Europe. And so there are two issues there. One is Europe's a quarter of the world economy. If Europe's in trouble, the rest of the world feels it in a number of ways. But it's not just the trade channels. So even with slow growth in Europe, US exports did pretty well in 2010 and 2011. The other issue, the real big issue there, is on the financial side. And so much like we saw when the US mortgage market hit a mess, there was all this uncertainty. Who's got what on their balance sheet? Who can I lend to? Who can I not lend to? Everybody pulls back. Fear of risk kind of go through the roof. If there's a real terrible event in Europe, and so someone defaults when no one was ready for it, things like that, banks go under that we weren't expecting to go under, then you can start to get cascades where you suddenly see the financial system seizing up again. And I think that's probably the biggest fear. The hope there is that it's not like we don't see this coming. Firms should be ready for this. Regulators should be ready for this. But we thought the same thing when Lehman went under and things didn't go particularly well. Outside of Europe, I think one of the other big fears out there is a real shock in commodity markets. And so we've seen, I think, twice in the last few years where something has happened in commodity markets that send oil prices up, and that's really put a big pressure against the US economy. And so things happen in Libya, oil prices go through the roof, the US economy, which at the time had been starting to gain some traction, loses traction. And so there are a lot of trigger points in the world, and it doesn't matter if we produce all our own oil or if we're energy independent or not. As long as oil is a big part of what we consume, and it's a global market for oil, we're going to face problems if there are problems there. So I'd say those are two of the big trigger points you have to worry about. There's also, in general, in the last 6 to 8 months, there's been a broad slowdown across a lot of world economies. And so there is a fear that even with slow Europe, US exports were really a bright spot for the economy in 2010 and 2011. If China slows and India slows and just not go through a recession and not kind of fall off a cliff or anything, but just slow down some, that one engine that has actually been positive for the US economy can kind of disappear, which again makes it much harder to get to a more robust economy. But I think in some ways, one of the big fears is we never know what it is, right? So in January 2011, no one really thought the big issue that policymakers would be worried about would be how do global supply chains react to a terrible earthquake and nuclear tragedy in Japan. That wasn't on anyone's radar, and yet that became a real problem. No one was thinking what happens if Libya goes through an uprising and suddenly world oil markets seize up. And so there are a lot of flashpoints around the world economy, and when your economy is in a weak spot and vulnerable, lots of little things can cause problems. And so, I shouldn't call them little, lots of flashpoints, you're not as robust to those things. And so I think that's one of the big fears is it's a big world, we're very interconnected, we've learned a lot in the last 5 years just how interconnected we are, and there are many, many things out there that can make the world economy challenging to whoever is president in January 2013. I think the one thing you can almost guarantee is that in their 4 years that they're president, things that no one is talking about right now will be key flashpoints in the world economy, and that's why trying to make sure you're ready for them is important.